Thank you for joining us. We're doing a series of studies on discipleship, and I hope that you have learned as much as I have about following Jesus as I look at the life of Peter and learn from his experiences what it means to follow Jesus. This evening I would like to read to you from John chapter 21 and reading from verse 15 to verse 23. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." Then he said to him a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you that when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you're old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go." This he said to show him by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, "Follow me." Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them, the one who had leaned back against him during the supper and said, "Lord, who is it that's going to betray you?" Peter saw him and he said to Jesus, "Lord, what about this man?" Jesus said to him, "If it is my will that he remains until I come, what is that to you? You follow me." So the saying spread abroad among the brothers that the disciple was not to die. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he was not to die, but, "If it is my will that he remain till I come, what is that to you?" Now, we have been looking at this important statement that Jesus made sometime after he had first called the disciples. This statement was not made initially. Initially, Jesus just said to people, "Follow me." But after some time, maybe a year and a half of following Jesus, he then said to them, "If anyone wants to be my disciple, let him deny himself, let him take up his cross, and let him follow me." Those three things, which express the heart of what it means to be a learner, follower, or a disciple of Jesus Christ. We have looked at how this call to discipleship is in fact calling into a direct relationship with Jesus for the rest of your life. It's not just an event or an experience. It's an ongoing relationship. And then thirdly, we have applied that firstly to the mind that needs to be denied, sacrificed on the cross or crucified, and then following Jesus. Then we've also looked at the will, how that the will needs to be surrendered to Jesus. Today, we want to look at the really tough one, and that's the one of the heart, that inner part of man out of which so much flows. Now, learning from Peter, we come to this place which is in Galilee on the shores of the sea, and it is sometime after Jesus has risen from the dead. Peter had already run to the tomb, seen the clothes, seen the empty tomb, heard what the women had said and what the other disciples had said, that Jesus is alive, and now that there was this instruction to go to Galilee where Jesus would appear to him. And they were there. So this takes place after a failure. Failure in denying Jesus, failure in fishing because they caught nothing. And there on the shore, Jesus stood and called to them, and John recognized Jesus, and Peter jumped out of the boat and came to Jesus and was there in front of Jesus when they brought the fish, put them in a pile, and Jesus was preparing breakfast for them. And when they'd finished eating, must have been a difficult breakfast, but when they'd finished eating, Jesus turned to Peter and asked him 3 times, "Peter, do you love me?" He spoke to Peter's heart in his encounter with Peter. And this conversation not only restored Peter to his master and to his mission it also gave Peter an understanding and insight into the fact that regardless of your ministry, you are called to be a follower of Jesus. We are first followers before we are leaders. We are followers before we are preachers and teachers. We are followers of Jesus Christ. That is our core business. So 3 issues arise out of this incident. The first, the issue of love, which is a matter of the heart. Then the issue of age, which is a challenge we all will face, or we do face, young or old. And then there is the challenge of focus, which Jesus wants to have, the focus of the heart, which is the top priority in life. So looking at verse 15 to 17, we find the conversation between Jesus and Peter after breakfast, and there's the pile of fish, and Jesus points to this pile of fish, and he asks Peter a question. He says, do you love me more than? I want you to focus on that more than, because we love many things. And the issue for Jesus and for the disciple is not whether you love, but the issue is, who do you love most? Remember, he had already called them to a sacrifice of loving Jesus more than husband or father, more than children, more than anyone in this world. That's the high standard, the unique call of Jesus that sets him apart from other rabbis with followers. And that's one reason why you can't be followers of someone who's following Jesus. You must be a follower of Jesus directly. He speaks to your heart. He speaks to your life. And the question is, what is this relationship between you and Jesus? Do you love him more than anything else? But now the fish is a problem, because what do these fish represent? And in one sense, they represent work, because Peter had been a fisherman, and now he'd been called away from that to be fishers of men. And so in a sense, it represents work. Work in a secular sense, but also work in a ministry sense. Do you love Jesus more than what you do? Do you love Jesus more than your career? To be a disciple, you've got to do that. To be a disciple, you've got to love Jesus more than ministry. You will have to love him more than preaching, love him more than teaching, more than leading people, more than doing things that you do for people. If Jesus is not first and foremost, everything else is out of focus, because our hearts and our treasures belong together with Jesus. Now, Peter has to decide, and he says, yes, Lord, you know that I like you. There are 2 kinds of words used here for love. The one is agape, which is the word Jesus started using, and the second word, which is the one Peter always answered with, which is a human affection. He says, yes, Lord, you know I like you. And so he gives him instruction to feed his lambs, to feed his sheep, to tend his sheep. And so he defines and describes Peter's future from fishing to farming, from being a fisherman to being a shepherd. He calls us, secondly, to love him more than these, because the fish also represent the other disciples who are now getting out of the boat, and they're coming, and they're sharing, and they're there. And it was an issue in Peter's life, because he was afraid of people. He loved people. He needed their confirmation and their affirmation, but he was afraid of them. He was afraid of their rejection. He was afraid of their criticism. He was afraid of their reactions to things. And it troubled him right into his old age. It would become an issue again later with Paul and the legalistic preachers in Antioch. So we find here Jesus touches a thing of the heart. And he touches in Peter's heart a weakness. And he says, do you love me more than your weakness? Or are you more concerned about having your need met than loving Jesus and doing his will? What a radical transition discipleship takes us on in being just a believer into becoming a follower of Jesus. So he challenges Peter with a heart. And the challenge that work, ministry, and people present to your heart and mind is the challenge of capturing our hearts. It's a mistake to love your ministry more than to love Jesus. It's a mistake to allow your heart to be captured by the people you love. It's a mistake to allow your heart to be captured by the work that you do. So Jesus is very radical here, and he says, do you love me? Twice Jesus used the word agape, God's special kind of love. Twice Peter answered phileo, human affection. Third time Jesus said, do you really have human affection for me, Peter? It was a hard blow, but it was a wounding of the heart that set the man free. Some things God can only deal with through crucifixion, a wounding. You'll only be free when you've suffered. So Peter answered, you know that I like you. And Jesus left it at that and went on. Now, he concluded that discussion challenging Peter to follow him. And the second thing is he began to speak to Peter about the question of age. And I have often struggled with this thing. I wonder why we have to grow old before we get enough sense to learn from the Lord. By that time, we struggle to learn. Why don't we learn when we are young? There's a reason why God calls most people when they're young. There's a reason why God called the disciples when they're young. There's a reason why older people have to have younger people in their lives, because you and I stop learning the older we get. And the thing that stops us learning is the thing we think we know. We have to always have this mindset that says there's much more to learn. There's much more to know. The familiar with what is does not mean we don't have more to learn. So there's the challenge of when you're young. And so he says to Peter, you know, when you were young, you wore the clothes you wanted. Very, very hip answer that Jesus gives to people, because young people are very fussy about the clothes they wear. Old people, you could see, they don't care about the clothes that they wear. Not in the same way. He says, but when you're young, you went where you wanted to go. You're adventurous, you could make your decisions, you could free spirit, you could go. But now, when you're old, limitations prevent you from doing that. And the challenge is to follow Jesus from your youth into your old age. That when you get older, that you still have the flexibility to be led and not just get so used to leading that you can't follow anymore. And so he says to Peter, Peter, you must follow me. The challenge then he presented in verse 18 is a challenge which I hope that you will think about and pray about. The third is the focus of the heart. The top priority of our focus is to follow Jesus. And verse 19 to 22 tells us that he gives him a personal challenge. But this personal challenge has got two aspects to it. The first thing about this personal challenge is, what about others? Just after Jesus had spoken to Peter, his focus was taken off Jesus. He was distracted. And John walked by and he said, well, what about John? And there is a measure of irritation, I think, that you can hear in the voice of Jesus when he says to him, what is that to you? It's not your business. Why are you worrying about John? Why are you concerned? Why are you focusing? Why have you got questions? Why are you busy with what is the matter? Your focus needs to be on Jesus, not on other people. We need to love people, but our focus is never to be on people. Any ministry that is people-focused will ultimately be disappointed when we stand before the throne of God. We need to learn this lesson. As a church, as missional members, it's true we meet people's needs, but God's purpose is more important. And it's more important we do the will of God. And in that process, we will help people because God loves people. But people are not the main issue, not the main focus. It's hard for this generation, which is so human-centered, so humanistic, to accept that there's more than me in the picture. There's more than you in the picture. There's more than us in the picture. Listen to what I'm saying. God's purpose embraces even the whole earth, the whole universe. It is more than just you and me. So the challenge then is to escape ourselves and escape our concern for ourselves and for one another. Your Christian life can't just be lived out of comfort you get from people. If lockdown has showed anything, it is, amongst others, showed that you must be able to worship, pray, serve God, live your life productively and fruitfully, even if circumstances change. and you are not free to have connection with people like you did before. Paul had the same thing. He was locked up in prison. Fortunately, we're only locked up in our homes. We have all the pleasures and comforts of home. So it's not as tough for us as it was for them, for him, and for many throughout church history, and many people in the world today who are finding Jesus is real. When all the supporting structures of life are taken away, Jesus is still real. And your relationship with Jesus is still number one. Keep your focus. Challenge your heart today. But then the second challenge is of yourself. The challenge is, what must we do? Peter hears the words of Jesus. Listen, that's not your business. Stop fussing with others. You follow me. The Pharisees made that mistake. They were always fussing with other people's lives. But Jesus calls you first to live a godly life yourself for his glory, to make sure your heart is clear and to live from an inner to an outer perspective in life. Not to turn it around, but to learn in the right direction, to live in the right direction. So now we find that he reminds Peter of the first thing he ever said to Peter in Matthew chapter 4, verse 19. He said, come to me. Come here. Come closer to me. He invited Peter into this closeness with him. He invited Peter into a relationship with him. He invited Peter into fellowship with him, a companionship, a close union, a communion with Jesus. There's no closer relationship that any human being is capable of than this kind of union with Jesus Christ. Fellowship with Jesus is the closest kind of relationship any human being can have, this partnership. But the second aspect was, he said, come to me and follow behind me. Come walk behind me. In indicating that Jesus is the number one in this relationship, and we are always number two. The greatest privilege is to be that number two. The greatest design God has for your life and mine is to become like Jesus.